today's Gyan Darshan presentations for DITA students. The topic which we are going to take up is an overview of 5th trimester courses, and it will be for the computing streams now. So basically what I will be talking about is simply I will be pointing out the main important topics which has to be discussed at the TLCs, but again some important concept I will try to explain them. I will also try to identify the type of practicals which you have to do in the your centers, and then I will leave the floor open for discussions now. So basically the format for our presentations will be that first half an hour I will be introducing the topic, and the remaining half an hour I will be leaving the time open for the discussions now. But before I start, let me welcome all my students and the counselors who have come from different TLCs. In fact, we have invited them so that we should be able to present a model for group discussions where both teachers as well as students can participate in the discussions now. Anyway, let me start with the topics now. In fact, that in computing, that from the 4th trimester onwards, we have 2 streams now. One is what we call them computing streams, and second one is called multimedia streams now. So in 5th trimester as well, we have 2 streams, multimedia streams and computing stream. In the computing streams, we are talking about this time 3 issues or 3 topics. 2 are theoretical courses. One is CSI 24. It is called Object Oriented Programming, and the second one will be CSI 27 called Multimedia and Internet Development. It is basically mixed of both computing as well as multimedia related courses. So there are 2 theory courses and 1 major project which you have to do. You have already done a small project in 2nd trimester, but this trimester again you have to do a major project which will combine your skills which you have learned right from the 1st trimester till 4th trimester and apply them in solving the bigger problem. So there are 3 projects are there for the computing streams. One is called CSI 10 Advanced Computing Project. The second one will be CSI 11 Advanced Software Engineering Project, and the third will be CSI 12 Advanced Business Information Technology Project. So again 3 will be optional, any one you can pick up. And again for the multimedia stream there is a separate project which we'll talk on Wednesday. So now let me talk about what we are going to discuss now. Again I told you that we will not talk in detail today. The topics will be not very much exhaustive. Simply will be identifying the issues to be taken up in your centers, and from next presentations we'll talk much more on each of the topics now. So basically the basic objective of the first course, what we'll call them CSI 24. Let me show these slides now here. If we discuss the common features of object-oriented programming language, you have to understand that today you might having this type of knowledge that there is only C++ programming language or Java programming language treated as an object-oriented programming language, but in fact there are many programming language which are claimed to be object-oriented programming language. So the purpose will be to explain all the common features which are supported in all the programming language. C++, we have a Java, we have a CLO, CLOS is another object-oriented programming language, we have a IFIL is another object-oriented programming language, and so on. So there are many programming language, and we have to find out the basic common features of all the object-oriented programming language. We have to understand those basic concepts. We are not talking about the concept level today. We are simply trying to identify the basic how an object-oriented programming language is different from a non-object oriented programming language, for example C programming language or Pascal programming language, and so on. Or what are the basic features all object oriented programming language must support. So you have to understand those theoretical concepts very well. So we'll talk about all the basic concept, and also we'll try to introduce the advanced concept. Like for example in C++ we have advanced concept called templates, and also what is called exception handling. We'll talk about all those concepts. I will try to introduce them, and we'll have some discussions on this one, but we'll not go into details of C++ programming syntax, because something we'll talk not here, that is something you can take up at your center. We'll more on the theoretical stuff we'll be taking up. So you have to understand all those basic stuffs here. Now, so basically 3 major topics which we have in this whole course CSI 24, what we call them object oriented programming language. One is called object oriented. So 3 outcomes are there, right? So you have to understand, so 3 outcomes means at least 3 sessions must be delivered from our side, and accordingly you have to plan your sessions at your TLCs. So the first outcome or first major objective of this course is that you have to understand all object oriented programming concepts. And there are many concepts which we'll try to list them and try to explain, right? And then the second will be that you have to be aware of all the object-oriented programming design methods. You see, this course is your foundation for doing your major project. You can do your project in your C++ or a Java, but for that you have to understand certain theoretical issues now, how to design a project. So you can design a project using non-object oriented programming environment, or you can design a project using object oriented programming language. Then the whole design strategy will be different. Here you have to understand certain type of methodology for designing object oriented programming languages. For example, we will talk about OMT. So OMT is one such methodology for writing a program or solving a problem using object oriented programming language. But if you are trying to do a project in, let's say, C and C++, so the OMT technology will not be used, because C and other Pascal programming language does not support objects. So the basic unit of object OMT is basically objects and classes. So you have to understand what is OMT. So we'll talk about object oriented programming design methods, and also we'll talk about reuse system components using. See, you know that the real advantage of object oriented programming language is what we call them reusability. So what we have a inheritance mechanism. Some programming language supports single inheritance, some programming language supports multiple inheritance. Like for example, in C++ you have a multiple inheritance, but in Java you have only single inheritance. But in Java also you can have a effect of multiple inheritance through using some other type of construct, what we'll call the interface. So these three major topics are that how to develop a software using reusing concept or inheritance concept. Second will be how to apply OMT or certain methodology for writing a software, and then of course you have to understand all these basic concepts. So let me talk about very briefly what are those important concepts. So now what we have listed here is not only confined to C++ or Java programming language, but we have listed only those concepts which are found in all the major programming object oriented programming language. Now first thing, representations of ADT. Each object oriented programming language must support a construct to represent abstract data type. You know that in C language you must understand that in C programming language the basic unit is function, right? So when you write a program in C language, everything you have to break them into the functions now. So you will have a 2 functions, 3 functions, 4 functions, 5 sections and so on. But whereas in Java as well as in C, all your program has to be broken down only into a class and object. So the basic unit for representing your program is your classes now. So ADT is so how we represent ADT is a class. So class is a basic construct for representing abstract data type in C++ and as well as in Java. The second thing, what you have to understand, and all object oriented programming language supports them, that is called the scope of access or member data and member function. Basically, who can access a particular member from the class, who can access particular functions from a particular class, and so we are talking about a scope of access. So you remember we have in Java, we have introduced 3 type of specifier, or sometimes we call modifiers. One is called public, the second is called private, and third one is called protected. So they are basically confined to object oriented programming environment. This type of specifier you don't find them in any non-object oriented programming languages. So all object oriented programming language must support this type of specifier. So we'll talk about, in fact I will give you one example, because with 2-3 trimesters experience I have owned with our own students, we find that they have not yet fully understood where to use protected and where to use private. So these 2 constructs you have to understand, and there is a constructor and there is a destructor. Again, there is some confusion among the students. By constructors, most of the students, they think that by constructors means that the memory is allocated. By constructors, not at all. By constructors we mean only initializations of a variables or initialization of a class. You can have any number of constructors within a class. The purpose of constructor is not to allocate a memory, but simply initializations of a data or initializations of a variable within a class. The allocation of a memory in object oriented or in a class is done only by the new operator, but not by the constructor. Same way the destructor is not used for deallocation of the memory or delete a memory allocated by your program, but destructors are basically used only by what we call them for deinitializations of a variable, and actual deletions of the memory is done by the delete operator, which you have to define them into the destruction function and so on. So you have to understand these two terms very well. Let me repeat once again, constructor is not used to allocate a memory, it's simply used for initialization, whereas destructor is not used for deallocation of a memory or deleting the memory allocated by your program, but only deinitialization. So there are two terms you must understand very well. And there is another important concept here, what we call them dynamic binding. Dynamic binding is very important concept in all object-oriented programming. It's basically linking of your program during the runtime. But let me understand this concept dynamic binding. You have to understand something like this way also. If you have done a little bit of C programming language, in C programming also you have a dynamic binding. When you use a malloc or when you use a calloc, is basically used somehow the memory is allocated somehow during the runtime. Somehow dynamic binding is somehow linked with runtime memory allocations and so on. And you know one thing that, but anyway, before coming to that one, let me explain you. Sometimes we say a static memory allocation, or sometimes we say dynamic memory allocation. By static memory allocation is that memory is allocated by the compiler. For example, if you declare some variables, if you declare some array, then memory is allocated by the compiler depending upon the size of your array. But if the memory is allocated by an operating system or by a browser in Java programming language environment, this is called the dynamic memory allocation. So somehow dynamic binding is somehow linked with the dynamic memory allocation. Again, sometimes the students don't understand that what exactly we understand by from which part of the memory the dynamic memory allocations takes place, whether it is from the stack area or from the heap area or from general RAM area. You must understand that your main memory is divided into three parts, what we'll call them RAM, stack, and what we call them heap area. So basically it is the heap area where from memory is allocated by the browser or by the operating system. So dynamic binding is very much important, somehow the memory management part of it. So dynamic binding somehow, how does object oriented programming language allocates a memory during the runtime and so on. And then of course the most important part is what we call them inheritance now, that you have to understand that without inheritance you can't write a program. So always you write a program in object oriented style such a way that maximum inheritance can take place. There must be some base class, and from base class you can derive number of other classes. If there is no inheritance, then it means that you have not written a program in object oriented style. Just like in C language, if you have not exploited the pointers very well, then your program is not optimized. And the word optimization, last time also I have referred that you must understand, you're not simply writing a long code or millions of lines of code and you will claim yourself to be a good programmer, but always you must understand, you have to write a program in such a way that memory should be efficient, right? The what we'll call them CPU time should be efficient. So you must understand what feature of a programming language or package optimizes your program. And what we call the template is basically, template means what we'll call them parameterized type. You have to write a function such a way that it will cater to all different types of data types. In C programming language, let's say for example I do the sorting, I do the searching. If I do the searching and sorting for different data types, I have to define a function accordingly. Somehow the template is a basically generic type, a generic function which takes care of all different types of data type. But we'll talk about templates little bit later on, not today, because we have a separate, if there is C++ presentations, more details will be on templates now. And the most important thing in C++ is called exception handling. That you have to understand, because in Java also we talked about exception handling. In fact, the exception handling feature was introduced by C++, but somehow C++ programmer has not developed this culture of using exception handling in the program. It is the Java basically forces you to use exception handling. If you don't use exception handling in your program, then your program is not reliable now. So to make your program much more reliable, it has to be exception handling. But let me tell you now, exception handling means that is runtime error management in object oriented style. Runtime error management. When you have a compilation error, it does not come as exception handling, but is a runtime error. For example, there is certain logical error within your program, or might be stack failure, or might be some memory failure, or might be some power failure. So all these type of thing which takes place during the executions of your program comes as a exception handling. And Java, you have, you know, when you're writing a program in Java, you have to use exception handling. Without exception handling, you can't do it. So most of the time, the system gives you lots of packages, lots of classes to use that one. In rare cases, you have to define your own situations and so on. So exception handling, templates, inheritance, these are the heart of whole object-oriented programming. So you try to use them, or especially when you are handling a major project. Without it, you can't think of writing a program. Right. So let me give you now, and in fact I will ask you, as I told you that after half an hour I will give you a control, but in between also I want to pass a control. Just I want to ask you something, whether you have understood private, protected and public. Let me introduce this topic first, what exactly we understand, and then I will write a small program and you will say whether this is possible or not, and then we'll have more discussions now. You know that there are three specifiers: private, protected and public. You must be aware of whether private can be used with methods, whether private can be used with class, or whether private can be used with a variable only. These three things you must understand. But here what I am trying to explain you, the scope of access now. So if you have declared a private, then only within the class where it is defined you can access to it. That word you have to understand very well. Let me repeat once again. If you have declared any method or variable of a private within a particular class, then only within this class you can access its variables and its data, not outside this class. And I will try to make this concept a little bit clearer now. Protected means that you can access the data, within this class, or access a data from its subclass but within the same package. Now here there is all object-oriented programming language, they differ little bit whereas the protected is concerned, but where is a private is concerned, which is highly restricted, they have the same inferences everywhere. But in protected, some programming language supports that you can access data, protected data or protected method from other packages also. But here what we are talking about, not at all. In Java or basically in C++, to my knowledge, that you can access data from the subclass only within the same package, not outside the package. And public is really public. You can access from within the class, outside the class, from the subclass, outside the package. So it's an open architecture sort of thing. So wherever you want, you can access to it. But if you have not understood this concept, let me give you a small example. In fact, I have presented this example when I have given you Java presentations. Just see this, look at this program, and I will ask you whether it is correct or not. See, I have a class alpha. Look at this program, class alpha. Within this class alpha, I have defined one variable. What is this variable is called? I am private. This is variable name, and which is declared to be private. Within this class, I have declared a private method, which is also a private type. Now, this private method, what it contains? It is basically contains one function called println. This is read as a println. This is a println method which prints private method, and you understand system.out.println, right? Now, first you tell me, just I pass the control back to you. I think you show to them now what is the mistake in this program. Yes, who can tell me now? Just pass this. Who can tell me what is mistake in this program? Look at this program now. First to tell you what is the syntactical mistake in this program. There is a class alpha, the private int, this one, private void, private method, system.out.println. Can you show them? Who can tell me what we have? What is the mistake now?
The S of system is small. It should be capital.
Yes, S should be capital. Right, this is one mistake. This is major mistake I was just pointing out. This is a system class. So this class must be a S. This must be a, this one, capital now. Right? Okay, now this is one mistake. Okay, now let me go now. Now I am declaring now. Okay, now before that I am just giving you some hint to you, is that now what is its a scope of access. I am just trying to explain, and through example I will ask you whether it is true or false. Now objects of type alpha can inspect or modify the IAM private variable and can invoke IAM private method. You have understood now? Only object of that type can access to it, but objects of other types cannot. Right? Anyway, I have So I am writing, don't take it as a, just here I have I have written something, but it might be some mistake here. You tell me whether it is correct or not. Now what I am trying to do is that class beta is another class. Within this beta class, I have defined one method called void access method. Within this method, I have defined one alpha object. Understand this one? Within another class, I have defined an alpha object. Now I am trying to access the variables and method of alpha object within another class, whether it is legal or illegal. Yes, please. Legal or illegal? Illegal. Or yes, what about you?
It's illegal, sir.
Illegal. It is really legal. The reason being is that what you have here is that, see, with the scope is only at the class level, not at the object level, right? So if I could have access directly, you understand this one? See, this is basically I am accessing from beta. ठीक है ना? ठीक है? So okay, sorry, legal or illegal? Just once again, is it legal or illegal? Don't change your statement now. Is it legal or illegal?
Illegal.
Illegal. See, it's correct. It's basically illegal. The reason being is that you are trying to access this one through which one? Through another class now, right? So the difference, if you could have access within the, if you could have declared number of alpha objects, if you could have declared number of alpha objects and trying to access, then there is no problem. Then it could be legal. But since you are trying to access only from the another class, so there is a illegal problem, right? So basically is illegal now because you are trying to access. I will show you another example. Then you say me whether it is correct or wrong. See, I have defined another class called class alpha. Now in class alpha, I have defined one private variable, and I have defined one method called boolean is equal to, and this contains one argument of another alpha type. You got the point now? I have defined one class alpha, right? Same class alpha or something different? Okay, so the same class alpha I have defined another alpha object, correct? Now I am trying to access something like this. If this dot im appropriate, same alpha object which I have defined earlier, you remember now, right? I am accessing if this dot im private equals another alpha dot im private, return true, else return false. So what is it? Will be true or false? It will be true. The reason being is that you are basically, what I am trying to explain to you is that when we say private, then you can access data from number of objects of this class. But if you try to access from different classes, then there will be a problem. So this is what you are trying to understand, right? So only within the class or objects of this class, yes, but not of different types of classes you can access to it. But right, so this is basically, just in this case, this is perfectly legal objects of the same operation, because legal objects of the same type have access to one another's private members, right? This is because access restrictions apply at the class or type level rather than at the object level. This is what you have to understand. Let me give you the protected now, and this is another example I will give you. It allows the class itself, subclass and all classes in the same package to access the members, right? Within the same class, from the subclass, and number of classes within the same package, yes, you can access to it. So if I write something like this, I have defined a package called Greek. It's a Greek package. Greek package, again this example has been taken from Java, but same is applicable to C++ now. So class alpha I have defined. This package is Greek now. You can define your own package. You can have any number of classes into this package. And now I have protected int I am protected. I have declared one variable and one method, and then again I am trying to print certain variables, certain message now, right? You have understood this class now. One class is there within other package. Within this class you have one variable and one method now. Now what you have just in this case, this is legal. Why? Because what I have done is I have defined another gamma. This is the next package or same package. This is, sorry, same package. Now in same package I have another class and trying to access it Same package from other class, yes, you can access to it, right? If I could have defined through another package, so no, it was a problem here. But if you define, but for the public, yes, you can access from anywhere. So this is what we have to, you have to understand now. So now object oriented, this is what we are. So basically the first outcome, you have to understand all the, you have to understand inheritance, polymorphism, templates, exception handling, the abstract data type, all the issues you have to understand very well, right? And then so you have to use either C++ or again use a Java programming language. But since you know little bit Java programming language, I will suggest you now you try to explore C++ out. But C++ is much more tougher than a Java programming language. Design a strategy. Now here you have to understand how to design a package, right? So the two approaches are there, what we call them data driven versus the functional decompositions now. So right now, see, all the time we have been emphasizing right from the beginning is that you have to understand the, basically programming is one thing, but designing, analysis and design of a problem is something different. You have to understand that part very well. And next time I will suggest you a book, you have to read that book, but you don't have to go into detail, because again in third year we are talking this topic in much more detail. But at least you must have a feel of how to design, how to do object oriented analysis and design. Little bit you have to read about it. So you have to understand one methodology for doing it, and one such methodology is what we call the OMT, right? Perhaps it stands for object management technology. We have a Buch methodology and so on. So but basically you try to focus on only one methodology and try to understand how to analyze a problem in using object oriented analysis. But all these methodology are independent of any programming language. Just like for example you design a DFD or you design a flow chart, it is independent of any programming language. So just like OMT is one such methodology which helps you to analyze your problem in terms of the objects and classes, interactions among objects and classes. So basically just to have a brief idea, and then I will leave open now. It uses three kinds of model. OMT, which you, if you start reading them, so you will have some ideas. It uses three kinds of model to describe a system. The object model, the three models are there, right? So when you analyze your problem, the three basic models will emerge. You have to concentrate on. So one model within OMT methodology is called object model. What this object model is called for? Object model describes the objects in the systems and the relationship, right? Finally, the basic unit in object oriented programming language, that is object now. So you have to break your problem in terms of number of objects, and you have to find out the relationship. Just like in C language, you break your problem into number of function and then try to find out the relationship among the function. Same way you have to find out what are the basic objects and what are the relationship among these objects now. Then you have to find out, then you have to use another model. Dynamic model is not that all the problem will contain only, I mean, one problem might be having only one type of model. No, all the problem will have all the three models are there. Dynamic model, you have to analyze your problem in terms of object model. You have to analyze your problem from the dynamic model point of view. And what is dynamic model? Dynamic model describes the interactions among objects in this, right? Is basically the it is runtime behavior somehow, sort of things now. How they behave on the runtime. This is what basically they talk about dynamic models now. And then we have a functional model. The functional model describes the data transformation, how they are trying to change the value in the object. That's something they are talking about. So this is basically your OMT methodology. And finally, about the CSI 24, we have to have design refinement class. So basically here you have to the counselor or the teacher, faculty, they have to explain to students now that what exactly they understand by reusability. They have to come up with a larger package example, and so that, let's say for example, how inheritance can help to design a big software now. Like for example, how they can use the library function, how they can use a Windows and so on. Even Visual Basic can be used to explain the reusability purpose. So basically the third outcome is based on developing a large packet using the inheritance mechanism. Rather than, you know that I'll just tell you one thing, when object oriented programming language concept is not new, is very, very old. In fact, it came with the promise that why can't we design a software similar to design a hardware. You know, today if I have to design a hardware, what we do now, simply I have to simply combine, fix and plug all these components and I can develop a software. You suppose that if I have to assemble a computer, it takes hardly half an hour, and I can buy one component from one place, another component from different place. Simply I will combine them, I will produce it. Now why can't we design a software that way, that instead of rewriting from the scratch, I will simply buy a component from here and there and combine them. So Java Beans, for example, in Java is basically used for that purpose, that today after some time we will see that most of the software professional, they will be not writing a software from the scratch, they will be simply developing a beans, and you as a software developer simply will be looking for whether you have a business beans or whether you have a beans in this area, and there will be a software which able to plug them. Some students was telling me that you can design a browser within a week today, because all the components for designing a browser is available in the different public domain. Simply you can pull down and simply you can combine them. So we are talking about in that. So C++ came with that promise that you can design a software very similar to design in hardware, but somehow it became so complex. Now Java has taken that role now. And you will see that after some time you will not be designing a complete software solution, but you will be designing or focusing a small set of components and try to combine with another set of components. So this is the trend going on. That is what we are talking about. The basic component is object rather than a functions or variable. But you have to understand the difference between object oriented and non-object oriented. Like for example C language, or you have to understand the C++. So all the basic differences you have to understand very well. Right, so basically the two basic issues which you have to discuss at your center is that how to use a classes from libraries to produce off-the-shelf solutions to a typical problem, and second will be how to modify your program using inheritance mechanism. Rather than rewriting, you inherit something and try to modify them. Since you have not done a data structure, but I can give you one small example of a data structure which coming to my mind immediately, that if I have to design a stack, if I have to design a queue, and if I have a linked list class, I will simply inherit certain characteristics from a linked list, and I can design a stack, I can design a queue, rather than designing the stack from the scratch or designing this one from the queue. Now I have something else to talk about, right? I have not discussed the second part of my this one, because I have the two courses are there, but I want to take a few questions from you, and then I will start with the second one. Now please, now you ask the questions, but the question must be confined to our discussions, what we are talking about here, not something from the outside now. Yes, please.
So can you explain a little bit about the friend functions? Like we have a private, protected, and then we have friend functions. What are those basically?
In C++ environment.
Yeah.
Actually, I didn't talk about C++ in very much detail now, but the whole idea, if I remember, C++ was basically that if you have declared any functions to be a friendly type, you can access from some subclasses also perhaps. But anyway, I will be not talking, because I have not gone into detail of C++. I will be basically talking about the architecture of the whole this one. Yes, please.
So why do we really need the constructors when they are automatically called?
See, basically, no, not. See, if you have you don't, not all the time you require a default constructor. See, you have a default constructor when you define your class. In fact, you don't need to initialize the constructor, because by default you have a default constructor now. But if you want to initialize your class with different variables now, for example, suppose I want to design some called a stack now. Take example of this one. I can design a stack of, let's say, 50 elements. I can design a stack or let's say queue of 50 elements, queue of 20 elements, queue of 30 elements. So if I want to initialize my class with different values all the time, then you require a constructor. But one thing I tell you again, I have already pointed out, by initializations does not mean allocations of the memory. Right? Allocation of actual memory will be done by the new operator. But again, the initialization word, if you have understood, the basic purpose of the constructor is that initializations of a class or object with a different types of data, like queue, different size, linked list of different size, and so on. Yes, please. Or suppose I want to design a rectangle. I can initialize my rectangle with different values, x and y coordinates each time. So that is it. Yes, please.
Yeah. In OMT object modeling technique,
yes,
we have CRC cards. What are those cards? CRC cards.
See, basically the OMT is more, there is difference between these two. See, the OMT is basically used for the object oriented, right? Is object oriented design purpose now. wherein the CRC is not of a non-object oriented program. If I remember now, the CRC is somehow not exactly. There is a difference between the two issues now. When we are talking about the OMT, we are simply talking about three type of different models: the functional model, dynamic model, and object model. Right? Correct? So basically, that not come as a part of the whole what we call them OMT design. That is separate. That comes as a what we call them non-OMT. This is what we explain. It's not real object-oriented part of it.
So you mentioned about virtual functions. What
No, I didn't mention about virtual function.
You said virtual function is one of the main features of.
No, what I was talking about something different now. I didn't come to at syntactical level now. What I was talking about is I gave you the basically I was talking in 2-3 features I identified. That is the one is what we call a template. Right? Remember, I simply talked about templates, exception handling, those type of issue identified. I didn't come. I basically talked about how to use a public, how to use a private, how to use. So I didn't come about the syntactical level. I am not talking about, because our basic purpose is to understand the whole architecture now. Yes, please.
Yeah, we can do the function of template by macro also. So what is the basic difference between macro and a template?
Oh, the macro is something, you have to understand the basic difference between macro and function. This is the basic difference. If you have understood the basic difference between macro and function, we have understood the basic difference between macro and any other thing. Like for example, what is the difference between macro and functions now? See, the function is what? That you define, I'm just coming back to it, define once in functions now. Define once and you can call anytime. What happens is that actual code is not inserted there. You understand this one? Actually code is not inserted. So what happens is memory requirement is much more lesser in functional call, right? Whereas in macro what will happen, it works very faster. But each time you call that one, the code of the macro is inserted at those very points now. So the template is basically somehow in that direction. But the real difference between something else now, template has the macro is basically used for defining a small type of functions. But template could be, you can define whole linked list as a template. You can define whole queue as a template. You can define a stack as a complete template. But macro has a space for a specific purpose for very small type, like formula translation. I want to, let's say I want to calculate the value of pi, or I want to calculate a small formula. There you can put now. So real, to my mind, the actual course, what is importance is the role of a template otherwise, right? For example, if you have to define a different data types, if I want to write a sorting of different parameters, right, then I have to rewrite all these things, simply have to change the parameter. But in template, not at all. Yes, please. See, basically, let me see the whole questions now. The question is must be to the architecture, the philosophy that I am talking about, because then otherwise we will not able to do the justice with our whole courses which I have delivered now. C++ syntax, something we are not talking at this stage. Yes, please. General architecture, you have to understand. Yes, please. Don't take time, because the time is very precious now.
What is dynamic binding?
See, dynamic binding, I was just trying to explain you that you have this is one way to implement polymorphism. Is one way to implement polymorphism. But I was trying to explain you that finally everything comes down to the dynamic memory allocation. But if you decouple these two things now, see, basically in polymorphism what you have is that again you have a number of functions, correct, with same name, right, but the different, what will happen, like for example, draw, let's say I want to draw a graphics library. Now, if I have to draw a graphics library, but there might be certain commonality between all the graphic objects, like they all draw, but they draw differently, right? So I have a common draw method, but this same draw, if you pass to rectangle, they will draw a rectangle. If you pass to circle, they will draw the circle, and so on. So the which draw will be attached with which type of class or object, that will be decided during the runtime, correct? This is called runtime binding or dynamic binding. But again, dynamic binding and runtime memory allocations, that is something you have to understand. I just want to talk about it. The basic advantage of object-oriented programming is that runtime memory management is taken care by most of the time by the system itself, right? You understand? Runtime, like for example, you just remember we have used what we call them. We have used if you use a malloc or calloc in C language. If you forget to use a free, then there will be a problem now. But here, no system, they have automatically after every certain period of time, they have a garbage collector program and they try to clean the garbage. But programmer also has a control. That is why you have a delete operator or destructors and so on. So the dynamic binding, runtime memory allocations, memory deallocations are related to memory management schemes of a object-oriented programming language. One more point I just want to add to you: this memory allocation is not from the RAM area as a general. So if I write integer AX, the memory is taken where from? A general RAM area. But if I do dynamic binding, or if I do malloc, or if I do the runtime memory allocation as by browser, the memory is taken where from? It is taken from the heap area, and heap is a very small area. So system has to run the garbage collector so that heaps should be free, because operating system does not refer to any other place, they always refer to the heap area. Yes, please. Yes, time is very important. Don't think.
Sir,
Yes, please.
actually, like C++ and Java are both object-oriented
That's
programming. Then why didn't Java support multiple inheritance? Like through interface they
Correct.
can.
See, basically, I told you that Java. If I have to have a multiple inheritance in C++, the basic requirement to support multiple inheritance is that there must be relationship among all the classes. And as many multiple inheritance you try to put it, the complexity of relationship will be much more complicated now. So what happens at the end? The debugging and becomes very difficult for the systems now. That is why Java is supporting multiple inheritance, not in that way that there must be class relationship, there must be some hierarchical class relationship among the hierarchy, not at all. Entirely some different way, much more refined and simplified form, so that the debugging and the maintenance of your program becomes much more easier. And this is the one drawback of C++, that the program becomes, why I told you, remember that the learning curve in C++ is very difficult only because of these add-ons. The maintenance becomes very difficult. The multiple inheritance, again, it has become, you see the case study people have come out, that the maintenance only because of multiple inheritance. Because class relationship becomes so much complicated in the bigger project that the maintenance and the debugging becomes very difficult now. Next question, please. The architecture, whole thing, philosophy, that is something we are talking about. Yes, please. If you don't have question, then you pass back. I will. Yes, please. Sapna, yes.
So what are the key points should we remember while creating program in C++? That it should optimize the program.
So basically, this is the buzzword we have been talking all the time. I remember last time I told you that most of the guys who are going and getting interviewed by the multinational company, they don't see how big code you have written. I have experience with my own students in doing MCA, and the basic question they ask you, how you have optimized your code. And I gave you one tips now, that in Java, although you are a small programmer at this stage, if somebody asks you something, you can say that without multi-threading, you can't optimize your program. In Java, in C++, we don't have a multi-threading concept. C++ does not support you. The basic answer should be that maximum inheritance. If inheritances have not been used, means you have not used the reusing facility now. So your code definitely will be much more lengthier and bulky and so on. So if you have a inheritance mechanism, then definitely the code size will be much more optimized. That is the one way one can easily, all the features are very important like polymorphism and so on, but inheritance is something appeals everybody, that without, this is the backbone of your whole C++ now. Unless you have inheritance, nothing can move further now. Any other program? If not, then I will move further. Then yes please, yes, bolo. No problem. Okay now.
Sir, excuse me. Sir, the C++ has a default constructor that allows you to initialize all the variables. Now, if this particular default constructor is not there and you make objects, so what happens? Where does the memory, suppose...
No, default constructor is not something you have to create.
No,
It's
you
always
have
there.
to create. It is there.
It is always there.
Yeah, it's always there.
It's always
but
there.
Suppose you don't have variables. Suppose you don't have a class does not have variables and you're making objects. So, if there is no default constructor, what functions that is, where will the basic, will the objects get made? I mean, will the birth of objects actually take place if there is no default constructor? Maybe what is a default constructor used for? Is it only for initializing variables?
I will just tell you, I have answered this question somehow. I told you that although I will not come at the syntax level at C++ at that level, I told you that this is the basic confusion most of the students have now about the constructors now. The basic confusion about the constructor is always that it allocates a memory for your variables, right? This is what you have now. This is what I am trying to say, that this is not correct. It is not there. Constructor is, then many can ask, then as many constructors, so many destructors you must have. It's not true. It's not necessary that you use, for example, any class, if n number of constructors if you use, you don't require n number of destructor. The reason being is the constructor is not related with the memory allocations part. The constructor is always related, the memory allocation is done only by the new operator, correct? So even if you don't use the memory, the object will take some memory, a space will be utilized for it, not because of you don't have a default constructor, you don't have a variables. You understand this one? Not because of the variables that memory will be memory will be always be allocated, because unless of what exactly, for example, take example of integer. Integer, if I write integer, does not make any sense unless I declare integer x equals something like this, right? So even if you don't have a variable, the initializations will be done. If you initialize to something beginning and something to end, that's something you don't have to worry about, correct? So your program will be working perfectly, object will be created, and so on. So right now my answer to your question is that the constructor is, don't link the constructor with the variables and something like this. Default constructor will be always be there, right, because memory has to be allocated even otherwise, correct? Remember, like for example, if I declare main function, now we don't declare main function what type of data it returns to, because always it returns a control to the operating system. So for that purpose, whole memory management is required by the default constructors and so on. So otherwise is required now, no problem. This is where you have to understand from the memory management point of view. I am not coming at this syntactical point of view. So this is what we have. So let me summarize very quickly that we have discussed, we have identified the important properties of any object-oriented programming language, and that what we listed is that all the object-oriented programming language must support inheritance. They must have a parametric data types, or what we call them template class. All the object-oriented programming language must have a memory management part. Like memory management part we listed now, and some supports inheritance, single inheritance, some support multiple inheritance, and so on. They must have encapsulations mechanism, they must have the scope specifiers like private, public, and so on. So these are the basic things of all object-oriented programming languages. Now once we have this one, you see basically what I suggest you now, coming to the practical part now. We suggest you that the object oriented, now again it is optional now, we have not decided whether we will conduct the practical examination, what practical examination will be conducted in CSI 24. Either again bring back to Java here, or if you are tired with Java, then move to C++ at this stage. So but anyway, to understand this concept, you have to have at least C++ practical exercise. I think most of the centers have already started these exercises now. So we are suggesting you the minimum side that you must do at least 2 weeks practice on C++, and we'll decide later on that whether what type of practical examinations will be conducted, either in C++ or we have another multimedia component is coming up here, either you will do some multimedia component here. So we have to decide now, we have not yet decided. So this is what we have. So now let me summarize one more, that there is one book you have to read, and all the TLC coordinator must get that book, but not go into detail. It is by object oriented design by Rambo, perhaps the Rambo, and I think next time I will show you that book here. I will bring that book by Rambo, by Prentice Hall of India. And this is something about certain methodology and so on. So we have to just read 1 or 2 chapters to just read, so that you must be fully conversant and apply this technique in doing your advanced projects. Now here is again, just I will try to list some important point here, that the CSI 27 is basically somehow you are having the flavor of many things now. You are going to learn some JavaScript. We are not talking about here in this class what is JavaScript here. You have to do little bit of HTML programming. You have to understand the browsers, how does it works now. HTML programming have to be in detail. I don't know whether you have done HTML programming earlier or not. If you have done earlier, then we'll decide that what extra feature have to be added. So you are doing something on JavaScript. You are something doing on the advanced HTML or basic HTML programming if you have not done at all. Okay, then we are talking about, you have to know about multimedia applications now, where the multimedia applications is basically used now, correct? Then we'll talk about the basic design techniques in use the multimedia design software. Remember, so basically, for example, in if you want to develop object oriented software, then you are talking about OMT or Butch type of methodology for designing object oriented software. But if you are developing a multimedia type of application, there are different type of techniques are there, right? So same way, the way you analyze a problem and so on. So again, we'll talk about those techniques at a later stage. So the basic purpose of the outcome 2 that we call multimedia application is to introduce you technique for designing and development of multimedia type of applications. You understand? We can take one example and apply that one. How to insert a video, how to insert a graphic, how to do animations. So you can use one of the standard Photoshop or any authoring type of software. We can later on identify them. And finally, you have to develop some multimedia applications, right? We'll take a small example and again apply using any other tool. You can simply put them. And finally, you have to do documentation. So basically, the second course is more on the multimedia applications part of it, how to use multimedia. But again, it will have a practical component. And that's something you can either use a Photoshop or something. We'll talk to our counselor that which can be provided to you and so on. So finally, and you have to understand this thing, how to identify and agree a suitable applications for a new technique, how to develop the applications using an appropriate design methods, and demonstrate the finished applications in a structured format. So this is what you have to do. So this is, and again, what we are suggesting to you is that when you conduct a practical part, Photoshop will be at least 2 weeks for this batch also. The HTML depends upon what they have learned. Then again 2 weeks we are suggesting them. Again, it is a variable now. It can vary from, I can increase or decrease depending upon how much you have already this one. And the JavaScript, we are simply giving you some demonstration 2 to 3 days. So this is where so basically 2 to 3 weeks on C++, 2 weeks on the Photoshop, 2 weeks on the HTML programming, and 2 to 3 days we are putting on the JavaScript. So this is the whole planning schedule for this one. And finally, you have to do a project. But I will give a choice here this time, that if you have some project, but only real life project, not that something you sitting at home and design something. If someone has got a project from your organizations, then instead of that one, we will allow you to do your own project also. But all the parameters which we have defined, it must be listed. So this is what we wanted to discuss. Now let's have more questions on general thing, and then we'll try to do. So this is the JavaScript, the C++, Photoshop, and this one. This is what we have done. So we have this is what you have 2 courses and 1 practicals now. Any other thing? Now, you have any other questions now?
Kindly explain the difference between functional overloading and operational overloading. Operator overloading and functional overloading.
See, basically the again, that's something I don't want to come to at C++ level. But see, basically what I will be, they all are basic mechanisms for providing the polymorphism, right? And I told you that the polymorphism is one such technique for supporting the dynamic binding now. It basically gives you, rather than going into details of this one, it basically gives you much more flexibility. I was just giving you a small example. That, like for example, same operator can be used for, take example of Java. In Java, what you have is same plus operator. The same plus operator in Java is overloaded now. This plus can be used for doing arithmetic operation, and same plus is used for combining 2 strings now. Remember now? But in some other language, you have to use a separate functions for it. So this is what basically, it gives you much more flexibility. That same function is behaving a different way and being controlled through dynamic binding during the runtime, rather than redefining the name and so on. So basically, answering to your question, I will say that it gives you much more flexibility and control of your programmer and so on, rather than reducing the size and so on. Much more flexibility. Yes, please.
The project criteria that you were talking about just now. So what would you expect a live project to have? The HTML part of it, the JavaScript part of it, the C programming, or all what?
See, basically, I will be, when I define the project, I will not identify any tool at all. I will just leave it open now. Right now, depending upon your strength whether you can do this project into using C++, whether you can use this project into any the Java or so on. So we'll leave everything open. That is why I told you that this time, although we have, once we are thinking that let's define only single project for all, but since there is mass copying going on, again there is a problem that why you give less marks and so on. So we basically leave it open now. If you have a real life project, if only in case of real life project with certificate from the organization that the work is being done in these organizations, then only we allow the candidate to do the project on their own. But in case just simply that sitting at home, I want to do in Java or I want to do in C++, somehow we will not able to control properly. Only in real life, yes, we allow them. Whatever project, suppose you have got a project for website designing, something like this one, right, database and all sort of things, yes, you are free now. That will allow. So, but the project must meet all the life cycles. Project not like first time that simply you thought that project means doing a programming language exercise. This time it will be entirely different. You have to produce all the complete analysis and design documents. This is all we wanted to have for today. Thank you very much for coming. Okay, thank you.